Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to be breaking down an indie comic from Ablaze Publishing called Traveling to Mars, written by one of my favorite writers, Mark Russell. Check out my Mark Russell playlist if you want to go through some of the other titles by him that I have covered, and I've covered plenty. Now, I really like this Traveling to Mars book because it is Mark Russell doing what he does best, and that is exploring the deep questions of life, such as religion and the merits of it, and the meaning of life, and society in general. And I think it is a really touching and fascinating book. Now, the concept of this book is a little out there, but once you buy into the premise, it is quite fun. So, the premise of this book is that Earth is running out of natural resources, and they only got a few decades left before it's all going to be gone, basically. But a rover on Mars discovered that there is a whole bunch of natural gas and resources on Mars ready to be mined. So now, all of a sudden, there is a race to Mars because all the nations in the world and the corporations, they were going to fight over who has the rights to these resources on Mars. But it was decided that the first person or corporation that landed on Mars could get to claim the whole thing for themselves. So that is where our main character comes in. Our main character is just a regular, normal, average guy. He was a pet store manager in Alabama. He had a lot of regrets in his life. And his name is Roy Livingston. And Roy is dying. So a corporation picked Roy because he's dying anyway. So they will send Roy to Mars. So he will be there first. And he can claim Mars for this corporation. And in exchange, Roy's family will get a lot of money. Now, Roy is dying anyway, so he takes them up on this offer. And on the flight to Mars, Roy contemplates his life, his regrets, and the meaning of life. And there's a lot of philosophical debate and discussions that Roy has, that Mark Russell explores throughout this series. And I think it is a really touching and moving and a very interesting book. And it was also nominated for an Eisner for Best New Series. So I think there's a lot to enjoy here. So let's dive into it. Traveling to Mars. Traveling to Mars, written by Mark Russell, art by Roberto Melli. Traveling to Mars, Issue 1. We meet a man named Roy Livingston. Roy is just a average guy. He wasn't college material, never went to secondary education. He's divorced, and he spent his life working as a manager in a pet store in Alabama. Roy's life wasn't very interesting at all. Of course, a lot changed in the past week. Roy is writing his thoughts in a diary as he sits atop a space elevator, preparing for a journey to Mars. The year is 2048. Roy is joined on this mission to Mars by two super rover robots named Leopold and Albert. Robots equipped with artificial intelligence to keep him company and offer him some assistance. We see on a computer screen on the spaceship he is in, it reads, Alabama man becomes first to set foot on Mars. And some sub-stories for the day are, energy riots continue for the third week straight. Market falters as energy stocks in freefall. Roy, this average guy, is now one of the most famous people on the planet. But how did he wind up in this situation? How did he wind up on a solo mission to Mars, and why? Well, we jump back to his childhood. Roy grew up in Alabama, in a city called Eufaula, which was known as the Big Bass capital of the world. Or at least that's what the townspeople told themselves. Roy doubts most people thought too much about where to go for a Big Bass pilgrimage. So, in truth, they weren't really known at all. Roy's father growing up was a history buff. He was obsessed with reading obituaries. To Roy's dad, the worst fate imaginable was to be found unworthy of 3 lines in the Montgomery Advertiser. We see, as a kid, Roy's dad, reading from an obituary, tells his son, "This guy stepped on a landmine after saving his platoon in Afghanistan. Now that's an obituary." Roy's father always seemed like he was a little disappointed in his son. Roy, writing in his diary now, writes, "I don't think he had much confidence in me as a boy, or as a man for that matter. Even when I was very young, I could detect the impending disappointment in his voice. Disappointment being the opposite of hope, the expectation of failures to come. As I got older, I began spending the whole day in my bedroom, just so I wouldn't have to hear it. Though he often left for me little reminders, army recruitment brochures slid under my bedroom door, want ads for jobs taped to my guitar case, little tokens of dormant ambition to salve his growing suspicion that I would someday become a crushingly poor obituary." Roy's dad eventually died of herpes after a monkey bit him at the zoo. That's not an obituary one would really want. Roy muses to himself, "In my experience, people are little more than walking accumulations of regret, and none more so than myself." Roy is getting sidetracked now as he explains his childhood. He jumps to more current times. Yes, Roy's journey from pet store manager to space adventurer began 2 years ago on the planet Mars. A rover, one of the very first super rovers ever sent to Mars, sent an unexpected message back to Earth. It had found a massive deposit of concentrated natural gas deep below Mars's surface, an enormous untapped energy resource created during the lush and verdant ancient past of Mars. This is big news for Earth, which was seen now as a dying planet that had almost exhausted its own energy resources and never really tried very hard to develop new ones. According to this report on Mars, the amount of concentrated natural gas found there was enough to fuel the Earth for several more decades, making whoever owned that gas the de facto ruler of the global economy for the foreseeable future. This news kicked up a ruckus on Earth as nations around the world argued over who owned the rights to these valuable resources. Wars were threatened, but in the people's wisdom, they chose not to turn the question of who owned the gas into a fight, but a race. It was decided that because no human had ever stepped foot on Mars, no one could claim the mineral wealth underneath. In other words, they decided that the first person to set foot on Mars got to claim the whole planet for themselves. Now, to get to Mars would take time and a lot of problem solving, but the toughest nut to crack was not how to get a human to Mars, but how to get them back home after. And that is where someone like Roy Livingston came in handy. Roy one day was in his apartment, and he was visited by two corporate types, a man and a woman both in power suits. And they needed someone like Roy, someone they could send to Mars without having to bring them back, someone who wouldn't be missed. The thing about Roy is that Roy was actually diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. It was inoperable. He only had a few months to live. But these two people in suits explained to Roy that his very rare form of cancer is one where zero gravity would confuse the bejesus out of his cancer cells, and the cancer that was eating him alive would be forced to take a pause during the 6 months it would take him to travel to Mars. The buffet would be closed to the cancer. Of course, Mars would then kill him almost immediately, but until then, Roy would be just fine. These two people in suits offered Roy $10 million in exchange for his service. Well, of course, Roy would be dead, but they would give the $10 million to his family, and Roy's mother is still alive, and she could use the money. They told Roy that they chose him out of thousands of cancer patients they had screened. So the two people in suits made their offer to Roy, and after they left, Roy thought about it. Roy, he knew he was dying. He had even considered offing himself, maybe shooting himself in the head, or hanging himself, or jumping from a bridge. But when these two people in suits offered him $10 million, well, they kind of made the decision for him. He'll do that instead. So Roy packed up his stuff, everything that mattered to him, and he left his life behind. and he took a bus to Huntsville to the U.S. Space and Rocket Center. Roy was prepared to go on this mission to Mars. At the Rocket Center, he met his new boss, and he began signing some forms. Now, Roy had imagined that the people that approached him were working on behalf of the US government, but soon Roy would learn that that was not so. Roy, he signed a non-disclosure agreement. Under no circumstances is he allowed to share with anyone what he is doing, not even his family. In fact, as soon as he signs the papers, he will be in the custody of this company here. So Roy signs the paperwork, and then he goes to talk to a doctor to give him some tests. The doctor is a Dr. Rubens. Dr. Rubens gives Roy a physical, and sure enough, the cancer in Roy's body is seen on some medical equipment. Dr. Rubens confirms Roy's cancer and tells him, "You may be the only person on Earth whose life expectancy is improved by a trip to Mars." After Roy's physical, Roy's new boss, the man hiring him for this trip to Mars, a man named Jeffrey Phipps, decides to give Roy a present. He gives Roy a hat that once belonged to the great American blues guitarist and singer Stevie Ray Vaughan. Mr. Phipps tells Roy, "You deserve it, boy. You're about to become a hero. And not just to me, but to the whole planet. A goddamn hero. And we'll make sure the people know it." So Roy's only job was to go on this mission to Mars. And then once he landed on Mars, he had a duty to film a video, and on that video declare that the planet Mars and all of its mineral wealth therein is the property of the company that hired him. And then after that, there's no way he could get home and he would eventually die. Finally, as Roy sat there in this medical room, he asked, "Who are you people?" It turns out that Roy's job here will not be on behalf of the United States, nor China. Apparently, the new and final masters of the planet Earth, the masters that will hold claim to all the natural gas on Mars, these new masters will be the Easy Beef Corporation of Jupiter, Florida, makers of fine imitation meats. Well, after Roy passed the Easy Beef Corporation's physical, they took him to an island off the coast of Ecuador, wherein situated the base of the International Space Elevator. The hardest part about launching rockets into space is getting out of Earth's orbit. So eventually, at some point in the past, Earth built this space elevator, so the rockets could be launched from already outside of the Earth's orbit. So that is why Roy was taken here. Roy, he rode to the top of the space elevator, he got into his spaceship, and he prepared to depart. As Roy contemplated what he signed up for, he thought of his mother, and he realized that the first his mother would hear that he was gone would be when someone from the Easy Beef Corporation arrived to present her with a check for $10 million and a lifetime supply of imitation meat. It wasn't until that moment that Roy realized the value of saying goodbye, but it was already too late. Roy, having second thoughts, he screamed, "Wait! I've made a mistake! Don't launch!" But it was too late. Roy's ship was already gone. And from the silent stillness of space, Roy was launched into the darkness without even feeling it, silently purring away from everyone and everything that might have cared about him. Traveling to Mars, Issue 2. Roy has now been journeying to Mars for about 17 days now. The name of the ship that Roy is on is called the Ahriman. It was named after an ancient Celtic king named Ahriman. The young prince at the time, Ahriman, was traveling abroad with his brothers when they received news that the king had died, and they were unable to agree on which of them should inherit the throne. So the brothers decided upon a race, and the first among them to touch the native soil of their homeland would succeed their father as king. So then, once the brothers came to an agreement, they began their race for home. All of the various ships paddled to the point of exhaustion, trying to get there first. Once their homeland came into view, Ahriman realized that he was not going to win this race. His ship would not get there first. So, he came up with a plan. Ahriman ordered a warrior on his ship to chop off his hand, presumably his non-throwing hand. And then as they approached land, Ahriman grabbed his severed hand and hurled it onto shore, tossing it ahead of his brother's boat that was in front of him. When all the brothers made landfall, Ahriman's bloody hand was already there, waiting for them. Alas, that is how Ahriman became king. When Roy first heard of this story, he thought that maybe they named the spacecraft the Ahriman as flattery, to suggest that he, Roy himself, was to become a king of some kind. But allegorically, Roy realized that in this analogy, he is probably actually the hand, a small piece of humanity cut off from the body by the Easy Beef Corporation of Jupiter, Florida, and hurled through space to claim the prize ahead of their rivals. The ship that Roy is on was retrofitted from an automated space probe and was never really meant to carry human passengers. So Roy's journey wasn't as comfortable as he would have loved. The ship gave off a constant vibration. It made soup really hard to eat, and there was no way to turn off the lights. So when Roy wanted to go to sleep, he was forced to wear a little falconry hood that the Easy Beef Corporation gave him to help block out some of that light. Roy's only company on this journey were these two super rovers, Albert and Leopold, both of which were equipped with the capacity for human speech. But both of these rovers were only a few weeks old, so they were kind of dull company for Roy. They were handy though. In fact, just today, they rigged the ice dispenser machine to become a snow cone machine. And the two rovers, never having seen a human before, for all they knew, Roy actually seemed impressive. As Roy had left Earth's orbit weeks ago, his employers at the Easy Beef Corporation felt it was finally safe to announce their imminent victory in the race to Mars. Roy can only imagine his mother's reaction when she learned the news. Their announcement no doubt took not only Roy's mother by surprise, but the entire world. The announcement being that the whole world had been outwitted by a fake meat company who had won the race to Mars simply by choosing a terminally ill man to be their jockey. They had won their empire like so many before, merely by stooping to depths no one else had yet considered. The Easy Beef Corporation then offered Roy and his mother a chance to speak via the ship's comlink, which was still able to communicate with Earth. Roy's mother, now on a video call with her son, asked Roy, "Roy, what's this I hear about you going to Mars?" Roy, starting to tear up, says, "It's true, Mom." Roy's mom continues, "Roy, how could you do this to me, to your mother? You were all I had left, don't you know that?" Roy answers, "I know, Mom, I guess I just wanted to be something." Roy's mom answered, "Be what exactly? A moon rock?" Roy remembered his early 20s, and even then he suspected that one day he would destroy his mother. Although Roy thought if his dad were still around, he imagined that he might have approved Roy's crazy mission to Mars. But yep, after Roy graduated high school, his dad asked him, "So what's the big plan?" Roy, he joined a heavy metal band. They called themselves Viking Funeral. And to complete the look, Roy bleached his hair white, and he bought a pair of red contact eye lenses. Roy thought it made him look menacing like some sort of warlock or Norse god. But he actually didn't look that cool, and being a white-haired, red-eyed 19-year-old in Eufaula, Alabama, he didn't exactly fit in. And despite Roy's dedication to looking the part, Viking Funeral kicked him out of the band a week later. Roy's dad then told Roy, "Look, son, I don't mean to make you feel like I'm ashamed of you, I'm not. But someday when you're on your deathbed and looking back on your life, I want you to be able to say, I did something. I don't know what God put you on Earth to accomplish, son, but I'm pretty sure that when he asks what you did with your life, you're not gonna want to say, I dressed up like a Viking and played a little guitar. Like it or not, we're put here to work, son. But Roy's mother is not his father. Back in the current today, Roy's mother asks, "This is a one-way trip, Roy. Did they tell you that?" Roy answered, "Yes, Mom, I know. I'm dying, Mom. I'm sorry I didn't have the courage to tell you, but it's true. If I stayed on Earth, I'd be dead within a month or two. Sooner if I could go so gracefully." Roy's mom replied, "But you would have been with people who loved you. You would have been with me. And what happens, Roy, when you get to Mars and you change your mind?" Roy answers, "The same thing that would have happened if I jumped off a bridge and then changed my mind. Only I'll be on Mars and not under a bridge somewhere." Roy then asks his mom if she spoke to his ex-wife, Candace. Roy hadn't spoken to her in 20 years. Roy's mom answered, "I tried, but no one seems to know where she is." Roy thinks back fondly of his ex-wife, Candace. He didn't know how she'd take the news, or even if she would care, but whatever's passed between them, she's still the only woman that Roy had ever loved, and one of a small, shrinking circle of people who ever loved him. He would have liked to have said goodbye, that's all. To help Roy pass the time on the 6-month journey to Mars, the Easy Beef Corporation fitted the Aramon ship with an extensive movie library, although it wasn't actually that extensive. It only had 9 films, and 3 of them were from the Kangaroo Kid comedy franchise. Roy watched the movie with his 2 robots on board the ship. As they watched a kangaroo fight crime in the Old West, the robots asked, "Is this what life on Earth is like?" And Roy answered, "Sort of." As Roy traveled through space alone, he had thoughts of dying, and all of his old regrets seemed to gang up on him and surround him and attacked him as he tried to sleep. Roy was looking at a picture of his wife he drew from memory. He thinks, "I regret spending the last 2 decades working at a pet store. I regret watching too much TV. I regret sinking $400 into those vitamin kits I was supposed to sell to my friends and family. I regret ever getting cancer, ferrets, or erections in church. I regret never having children. It would have been nice to have spawned a baby or 2, someone to whom I could have passed on what little I know. As it was, the only people I ever had to pass my experiences on to were the kids who worked at the pet store, and they never even listened to me. Apparently, I'm stuffed so full of regret that last night I woke up crying into my falconry hood, thinking about the ex-wife with whom I haven't spoken in 20 years. I wish I could somehow communicate with her telepathically and let her know that I'm sorry and that everything was my fault. It's hard to reflect back on your life and realize that the person who knows you the best in the world is someone who hates you now. Maybe your regrets gang up on you as you're dying because they know it's too late for you to fight back. Thinking of Candace, I clenched my eyes shut and rammed the following mantra through my mind over and over as if broadcasting it through space. I love you, I'm sorry. I love you, I'm sorry. I love you, I'm sorry. Traveling to Mars, Issue 3. Roy has a video call with Dr. Rubens. Roy is supposed to check in with Dr. Rubens once a week to make sure he's still okay and not going stir-crazy. Dr. Rubens tells Roy that he needs stimulating human contact. That's why they activated the rovers Leopold and Albert, for Roy to have someone to talk to. So Dr. Rubens encourages Roy to engage with them socially. Even though as robots, they may not be super interesting, it's still important to talk. While this convo is going on, the president of Easy Beef, Jeffrey Phipps, is also there. He tells Roy, "You hang in there, son. You're helping us, and by gumdrops, we're gonna do what we can to help you. And once you land on Mars, you'll become a goddamn hero to the whole human race. I'm glad you aren't here on Earth to see it, son. The whole world is falling apart. Energy shortages everywhere, riots and wars all over the place, all fighting over the peanut butter at the bottom of the jar. But once you get to Mars, we can fix all that. And you can fix all that. a goddamn hero. You'll be immortal. Dr. Rubens chimes in, speaking purely figuratively, of course. As Jeffrey Phipps leaves, Roy and Dr. Rubens actually have a more philosophical conversation on the concept of immortality. Dr. Rubens explained to Roy that while he may be the most famous person on the planet at this very moment, most famous people are forgotten in a decade or two. Even world leaders are usually forgotten within a century. Only a select few are remembered a few hundred years after their death. Fewer still after a few thousand years. The oldest person whom we still remember today was a guy named Sargon of Akkad, who lived about 4,300 years ago. But human beings were around for about 200,000 years before old Sargon, and not a single name, not even a whisper or a legend about any of them, survives. Immortality, when you get down to it, is simply a euphemism for not being forgotten yet. After their phone call ends, Roy is given a care package. Part of the efforts of the Easy Beef Corporation to keep Roy on track, to keep him from going bonkers. So they packed the ship with little boxes, little reminders of home, some memorabilia, and these boxes will be released to Roy at pre-planned intervals throughout the duration of his trip. Roy, he opens a box, and he realizes that these are just things that are trying to tether him to the world he's left behind. Nostalgia is just a method for distracting us from the fact that we're all dying. Roy, inside the box, sees a little memento from the pet store that he worked, a little magnet. He's also got a drawing and a picture of his wedding day. Roy, he then thinks of his wife. He thinks, I'd live for all eternity in a prison of memory if I could live there with her. Roy remembers back to a memory of when he first brought Candace home to meet his parents for Thanksgiving. Before they went inside Roy's childhood home, Candace asked, "Well, are we going in?" Roy stopped her and said, "Well, it's just that I heard that if you stop once in a while, just stop and stand still, that you're more likely to remember those moments in the future." Candace tells Roy, "Well then, let's just stand out here for a minute." And they did. But eventually they went inside. And the dinner with Roy's parents was nice and pleasant. Roy contemplated that the energy on Mars would keep the Earth spinning for a while, long enough for Candace to live her life comfortably somewhere. And I suppose that alone made dying on some galactic rock worth doing. After Roy and Candace's Thanksgiving with Roy's parents, Roy's dad talked with him. He told his son that he was happy that he brought Candace over for Thanksgiving. He always kind of worried that Roy would spend his life alone, but he's happy that Roy found someone. Roy's dad told him, "Whoever you become, whatever you do, it's better to do it with someone." Back in the current day on the spaceship, Roy has another weekly session with Dr. Rubens through their video call. Dr. Rubens asks how mentally Roy is doing. When was the last time Roy laughed? The doctor explains, "We equipped your entertainment center with a variety of movies, but we made sure to include comedies, just because it's so important to laugh." Dr. Rubens explained that humans are one of the few species with abstract intelligence that are aware of their own impending mortality. We tend to think about it all the time, which admittedly can be overwhelming. He explained to Roy that laughter is a defense mechanism, something we evolved way back when we lived in trees, that it's a form of existential panic, that when danger comes, all that anxiety has to go somewhere, that when pain got you, you cried, and when it missed you, you laughed. But when does it ever miss? So Roy decided to try and watch some comedies. He popped in one of the Kangaroo Jack movies, and he watched. And the two robots also joined him. As Roy watched the movie with the robots, he laughed. And the robots had no idea what Roy was doing. They had never heard anyone laugh before. They had no idea what laughing was. In fact, this was rather alarming to the robots. They were incapable of laughing, that nothing about this was part of their programming. They made robot noises, buzzes, and beeps, But Roy told the robots, "Come on, human language, guys." So the robots searched their databanks for the ability to laugh, and they came up empty. But wanting to share this glorious experience, they copied it best they could by playing the sound of chickens clucking. As the robots would later explain, when Roy started laughing, they thought it was the sound of him malfunctioning. And maybe that's all it is. A few days later, Roy got another video call, and it wasn't a scheduled call, so he was a little surprised. It was Jeffrey Phipps. Jeffrey told Roy, "I told you, son, the Easy Beef Corporation takes care of its own, didn't I say? We found your ex-wife, son. We found her, and she has something she wants to say to you." Traveling to Mars, Issue 4. Roy is talking to Dr. Rubens and Jeffrey Phipps on a video call. They are preparing him to talk to his ex-wife, Candace. Roy thinks back to various memories of his wife and their courting when they both worked in that pet store together. Roy tells Dr. Rubens and Jeffrey Phipps, "I can't thank you enough for getting me the chance to talk to Candy. It was my one and only wish." Mr. Phipps responds, "Well, it's the least I could do, son, especially considering that I didn't do anything. She found us and asked if she could speak to you." Mr. Phipps then brings out a blonde woman in front of the camera. Mr. Phipps encourages Roy, "Well, go ahead, say something, boy." Roy hasn't seen his ex-wife in 20 years. He looks into the camera and begins tearing up. He says, "Candy? I'm here." Roy, he then goes up to the camera and almost embraces it. But then all of a sudden, the woman on the camera says, "Mr. Livingston, I'm not your ex-wife. I'm a representative of the True Bond Paste and Seal Company. I'm really sorry to approach you this way, but we have your ex-wife, and we're holding her at gunpoint. If you want us to release her, you need to declare Mars for True Bond Paste and..." All of a sudden, the woman gets tackled. Mr. Phipps yells, "Get her out of here, now!" The imposter then gets hit with the butt of a gun in her head, and she still screams, "True Bond Paste and Seal!" Mr. Phipps then talks to some others in the room. "Is this live? I mean, do we have a delay? Can we stop it from going out? Shit." All of a sudden, the transmission ends, and Roy, up there in space, is kind of shocked. All he could think about was Candace. Was she in terrible danger? Also, the Easy Beef Corporation's looking a little sketchy too, in a way. Leopold, one of the robots on the ship, takes a little pity on Roy, and he tells him, "You weren't supposed to know this. It's located on the exterior hull of the ship." Albert explains to Roy that in the event the Easy Beef Corporation thought that Roy might waver in his purpose, or worse, be turncoated by another company, they had a backup plan. They planted an explosive on board the ship. Roy started freaking out. He started worrying about his wife. Was she actually kidnapped out there? Well, if she was actually kidnapped, if he died, if the Easy Beef Corporation blew up his ship, Candy's captors would no longer have any reason to keep her alive. So the only way out of this was to survive long enough to meet their demands. So the explosive was on the exterior hull of the ship, meaning that Roy would have to go outside of the ship to dismantle the explosive. Roy was also worried that the Easy Beef Corporation might decide to blow up his ship to ensure he doesn't land and claim Mars for another company. So Roy with the two robots headed to the airlock to go outside the ship. But eventually it was decided that Albert should go. He was slightly smaller than Leopold, and his magnetic treads would be more effective, and it was safer for him to go than Roy. So the robot Albert went outside the ship, and sure enough, the little bomb device was exactly where Leopold said it would be. Albert grabbed it and threw it off into the vastness of space. Roy wondered, why didn't the robots tell him about the explosive before? Maybe they just thought it would never be used. Or maybe, like the rest of us, they simply realized how much easier it was to follow your programming, at least until the moment it's about to kill you. Roy then contemplates whether or not our employers were actually going to blow us all into space dust, write me off as so many others had as a bad investment. I suppose we'll never know. While the robot Albert was outside the ship, a little meteor flew by, and at this part in space, even though meteors are small, they can travel really fast. So one of the meteors hits Albert like a bullet, and he gets flung off the ship into the vastness of space. Albert would have died, but he was saved, thanks to some fast thinking by Leopold, who swung the ship over by 90 degrees, catching Albert with the side wing before he could float away. Albert then returned finally to the ship after his brush with the infinite. But like most people who return from a visit to oblivion, he didn't return the same. When Albert reboarded the ship, he was terrified and half out of his mind. He locked himself in the closet and began buzzing over and over again in the robotic language that he and Leopold shared. Bzz, 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 bzz. Roy and Leopold tried to make Albert feel better, make him feel safe, but Albert just stayed locked in the closet for now. Almost a whole week went by without any communication whatsoever from Earth and the Easy Beef Corporation. Did they think that they had destroyed us, or were they just considering their next step, thinking about the best way to neutralize the threat that they'd become? And the possibility that Roy might claim Mars on behalf of a rival. But finally, Roy got a video call. It was Jeffrey Phipps. Jeffrey said, "Well, this has certainly been an eventful week, hasn't it? Roy, we want you to know that we consider you a member of the Easy Beef family, and we take care of our own. Bring him in." Jeffrey brings the imposter woman out, as well as her associates. Jeffrey then explains to Roy, "We got him, the entire corporate leadership of the Truban Paste and Seal Company, and I think they got something they'd like to say to you, don't ya?" The imposter Candace woman explains, "We don't have your wife, we never did, we were just bluffing." Jeffrey then tells Roy, "We'll hold on to these characters until you land, to ensure that they don't go looking for her. So you just stick to your plan and we'll keep ours. Okay, son?" Roy answered, "Yes, sir." And with that, everything went back to normal, but Roy doesn't think he could ever look at the Easy Beef Corporation people ever again. Roy checked on poor Albert, who still didn't seem like he would ever recover. Albert, in his robot language, buzzed, and Leopold translated for Roy, saying that Albert asked, "Don't make me go back out there ever again," and Roy promised he never would. And with that promise, Albert finally came out of the closet and rejoined the others. And as the days and weeks drew on, the weekly meetings with Dr. Rubens continued, almost as if nothing had happened. Traveling to Mars, Issue 5. We then learn through Roy's narration of the Perseverance 2 rover. This was the rover that told Earth about the deposits of natural gas sitting below the surface of Mars, the largest single pile of treasure in human history. This rover is 13 years old. The Perseverance 2 contacted Earth with its new discovery 10 years after its mission had officially ended, 7 years past its life expectancy on Mars. But yet, still, there it was on Mars, taking samples no one wanted, transmitting data no one cared about, not realizing perhaps that no one was listening. Because the people that sent the rover to Mars understood what the rover did not, that it had been sent there on a suicide mission. Its top objective was self-preservation, but Roy contemplated he's not even sure anybody ever considered just how cruel that was, to be programmed to hold on to life at all costs, only to be sent on a suicide mission, as he supposes we all had. Was this proof that there was no God, or merely that he's no better at thinking these things through than we are? We believe that what we do is in service to something greater than ourselves, which, in all likelihood, is just what we tell ourselves, so we'll do it. Because when life is so short and death is so eternal, whatever we spend the pain of living on is, by definition, so much smaller. Back on the ship. Since Albert's brush with death, he has lost the ability to communicate in English, and Roy can't understand his binary buzzing. The ship had been equipped with replacement brains for the rovers in events such as these. Roy considered replacing Albert's chip, but that would mean rebooting him from scratch, taking from him his memories, which in the end is all any of us have. Besides, it's usually the damage that makes us interesting. So Roy decided to let Albert continue on, just buzzing away. Leopold warned Roy that there is a blip on the radar, floating on the edge of their scans like a ghost. It could be something to worry about. On Roy's next call back with Earth, he told them about it, but they didn't seem too worried. Mr. Phipps told Roy, "It's probably just an asteroid. You never mind about that. Did he get her latest care package?" Roy, he did get his latest care package. The storage bins that releases his personal time capsules is fully automated, regularly dispensing reminders that he was once a human being, whether he wanted to be reminded or not. This recent care package contained a t-shirt from his old band, Viking Funeral. Looking back on the t-shirt now, Roy doesn't even know why they called themselves that. I guess it just sounded cool. Roy, he really only joined the band as an act to delay his adulthood, rather than some sort of driving creative vision. But when they kicked him out of the band, it hurt all the same. But that's what got him working at the pet store, where he eventually met Candace, who would become his wife. We see a flashback to their time in the pet store. Candace asked Roy what are his ambitions and stuff. Roy joked, saying, "I don't know. I always kind of wondered if I could eat a 72-ounce steak in one sitting. What about you?" Candace answered, "If I tell you the truth, you'll think I'm basic." But Roy encouraged her to tell him her dream. Candace told Roy, "I want to have a child, Roy." I know, it sounds like the sort of thing you'd expect someone to say to their guidance counselor to lower the bar of expectations. The most boring, predictable things ever. It's just that when I was a little girl, my mom told me about the day I was born, and it just sounded so awful and fantastic to think that I had come out of this painful life or death ordeal. To know that I had struggled through all the blood and gore to be present in the world, it made me feel like I belonged here, alive, that I somehow forced myself into being. It felt like the most awesome power in the universe. When my mom gave birth to my little sister and I could hear her groaning and screaming, I just sat outside the hospital room door and cried. It's still the closest thing I've ever had to a religious experience. I just want to experience it from inside the door, you know? We then see a quick montage of some of Roy and Candace's happy times. Running through a cornfield maze, going skinny dipping out by the lake, kissing under the moonlight. Back on the spaceship, Leopold warns Roy once again of the blips on the radar. Whatever it is, it seems to be getting closer. In Roy's next video call with Earth, Jeffrey Phipps tells Roy that in his hometown of Eufaula, Alabama, City Council has approved plans to erect a statue of him in the town square to honor his achievement of being the first man on Mars for generations to come. This landmark will incidentally make the soon-to-become second most famous landmark in his hometown not as important. The second most famous landmark is a memorial statue to a sea bass named Leroy Brown, a fish. Roy then tells us the legend of this famous bass, Leroy Brown. Leroy Brown was a bass swimming in a lake. When the fisherman caught Leroy, Leroy looked at the fisherman with such sad and knowing eyes that rather than kill it, the fisherman took pity on the poor fish and brought it home, and kept Leroy as a pet, along with his other fish in a breeding tank. The fisherman used the tank to test new fish hooks. Having been fooled once, Leroy Brown never bit on a hook ever again. He even knocked other fish out of the way to save them from the hooks, too. A natural athlete, when the fisherman held a hoop over the water, Leroy Brown would jump right through it. Leroy understood that he lived in a breeding tank, but he saw no reason not to make the most of it. When a fellow fish died in the tank, Leroy would struggle with all of his might to pull them back down under the water in a vain effort to bring them back to life. This act of tragic heroism broke the hearts of all who witnessed it. And through his intelligence and compassion and moxie, this fish won the respect of the entire community, and people from all over the state came to pay homage to Leroy. But no one can outwit mortality, and not even Leroy Brown. And when he died, his corpse was lovingly scooped out of the tank and laid in state so all could pay their final respects. The entire town gathered, for whether he intended to or not, he had expanded their understanding of what a fish could be. So when Mr. Phipps told Roy that his statue was going to be 10 feet tall with a bronze plaque, recognizing him as the first human being ever to set foot on Mars, Roy said that was very sweet of him, though he had to admit he feels something of a fraud compared to Leroy Brown. Roy then tells Mr. Phipps about the blips on the radar and how they're getting closer. Finally, Mr. Phipps admits that that's because he's not alone out there. Roy was the first to be launched into space and he is a commanding lead, but when people found out about their plans, other powerful people did whatever they could to bridge the gap. They built a bigger, stronger spacecraft, and they threw caution to the wind, and they cut corners. And they found people that were even more disposable than Roy here, criminals with nothing to lose. They have been sent out here into space to take Roy down, to ensure that he never completes his mission to Mars. Although these other spacecraft, they are not equipped to land on Mars themselves. They have been purely sent to ensure that Roy doesn't succeed on his mission, to buy themselves time. Mr. Phipps warns Roy, they're coming and they're gaining on you, Roy. And you have no idea how many more of them are out there. Traveling to Mars, Issue 6. Roy, still drifting through space towards Mars, reflects on how real space travel is nothing like in the movies. There's no sound, no fast maneuvers, no flashy laser battles. Instead, everything is dictated by inertia, long stretches of time, and the slow, inevitable approach of enemies who might take months to catch up to you. The way these spaceships work is, once the initial thrusters get your momentum going, you're more so like a raft on the Mississippi than a fighter jet or a race car. So, you kind of just keep going in the direction you were going in. As Roy watches the pursuing spacecraft grow closer, he tries to carry on with the mundane tasks like getting lunch, but his thoughts spiral into darker places, particularly the realization that the ships following him aren't meant to land on Mars at all. They were likely built for one purpose only, to intercept and kill him. Dr. Rubens in a video call confirms that the ships are cheap, expendable models built by corporations trying to buy time until they can launch better, more Mars-ready vessels. And their solution was to send death row inmates given a reprieve under the Medical Research Act of 2032 to operate these crafts. Not because they're skilled, just because it's cheaper, and they only need to steer it into Roy's ship once they catch up to him. This grim revelation leads Roy to ponder what would motivate someone to accept such a suicide mission, only to come to the sobering conclusion, because I am the answer, implying that he himself accepted a similarly desperate mission, just with a different label on it. We now shift to a flashback set in Eufaula, Alabama, in the year 2024, where young Roy works at the pet store. He is told by his manager there to euthanize the older rabbits, either giving them a shot or feeding them to the python, as they have younger pets arriving soon. Roy is clearly uncomfortable, but he is going to comply when he is reminded that he is now a shift supervisor. This leads to a confrontation with Candace, who's furious about the order, and she's even more upset that Roy is gonna go along with it. She accuses him of being cowardly and spineless, saying that the rabbits see him and her as their parents. Despite Roy's protests that he's just doing what he's told, Candace quits in frustration, leading to one of their first real serious fights in their relationship. Roy reflects bitterly on his own inaction, how he wanted to quit and chase after her, but pride held him back. Now back in the present day, Roy prepares for a dangerous spacewalk outside the ship, accompanied by his robot companions. Roy has to do something about these ships that are pursuing him. We then return back to Roy's youth again. He is caught in a devastating hurricane named Doreen that floods his hometown. He wants to call Candace to make things right again, but the storm wipes out power and communication, and Roy's family huddles together in the darkness of their home. But in their home, Roy hears the sounds of kittens crying beneath the floor, and this compels Roy to take action. Despite everyone urging him not to go outside, Roy tears open the floorboards of their home and rescues a litter of newborn kittens. This impulsive act of kindness becomes symbolic, a redemptive choice. Roy's father tells him that he's proud of him, and Roy reflects when chaos strikes, focus on the storm you can control. Returning to the present, once again, up there in space. Roy is standing outside of the spacecraft with special magnetic boots keeping him attached to the ship. Roy is about to carry out a desperate plan devised by Dr. Rubens to deal with these pursuing ships. Roy dryly acknowledges that even if the plan fails and he dies, at least his death would have been strategically sound. We flash back to an hour before Roy's spacewalk, where he and robots prepare their makeshift weapons. A clever low-budget engineering hack involving fire extinguishers, magnetic tape, zip ties, and a remote-controlled ratchet motor. Dr. Rubin's idea is to use these to create thrust and nudge the pursuing ships off course. The logic is simple. Their enemies are moving purely on inertia, having spent all of their fuel. If their trajectory can be altered even slightly, the enemy ships will drift helplessly in space. Momentum once lost can't be regained. So Roy, he carries out the plan and it works. Roy, he tosses the makeshift weapons, the extinguishers. They fly towards the ships in the back, and the extinguishers blast foam into space, and the other ships veer off wildly. Roy's do-it-yourself defense successfully saves him. Afterwards, Roy reflects that the lesson of the universe is about how even a small force can change a lot, for better or worse. Back in Eufaula, Alabama in 2024, Roy sits in the wreckage of the storm with the kittens in his arms, and Candace finds him. She is safe. The two of them reconcile, and they name one of the kittens Peanut. This moment marked a turning point in Roy's life. After the storm, the two of them moved in together in a federal disaster housing, and they adopted the remaining rabbits from the pet store so they wouldn't have to be killed. And the two of them decided that they would get married in this small church. And life settled again, back into a kind of pleasant inertia. But as Roy notes, inertia doesn't last, not inside us. He's haunted by the weight of having indirectly caused the deaths in space. Even if Dr. Rubens insists that these convicts were already dead. So is Roy, he admits. The only real question is when they would die, and Roy chose to go last, to see where inertia would take him. The issue ends with Roy somber and shirtless, walking through the ship alongside his robot companions, back in motion, still headed to Mars, unsure what awaits. Traveling to Mars, Issue 7. Roy reflects on the fall of the Roman Empire in the year 476 CE, specifically the quiet nature of its death. The last emperor was a 10-year-old boy named Romulus Augustulus. He was dethroned and killed by some Gothic gentlemen with little fanfare, and that was it. But life in Rome carried on, almost as if nothing had happened. No one noticed. No one filled the power vacuum. The Roman Empire had been dead for 40 years before anyone realized it was gone. This then launches Roy into a poetic monologue about how the end rarely feels like an event. It's not a thunderclap or a clear finale, it's mundane. The end comes while you're spreading peanut butter on celery, while the world distracts itself with holographic ads and daily routines. You don't realize it's over until it's too late to get off the ride. Roy, he retrieves the last of the care packages Earth sent him. Though they're meant to bring him comfort, Roy is actually more so focused on hope. Hope that this box might contain a message from Candace. He wants to know if she's okay, that she thought of him, that she remembers him. But the box contained nothing important. No note, no message, just more reminders of how long ago the world ended for him, emotionally speaking. And now he's only just begun to understand that. Roy reaches out to Dr. Rubens, asking whether he's had any success in contacting Candace. Rubens says no, they can't find her, though they're still trying. But the world back home is falling apart. The planet is collapsing on itself. News reports confirm that society on Earth is descending into chaos. Highways are now closed to all but supply transports. Communications are disintegrating, and the streets are filled with unrest and panic over dwindling resources. Dr. Rubens tries to soften the blow, but the message is clear. Even if Candace wanted to reach out, she might not be able to. And then comes the real gut punch. Roy is told that once he is on Mars, he'll be alone. The ship's landing module was damaged in the attack, meaning communication from the surface will only go one way. They'll hear him, but he'll never hear back. Roy will be on his own. All the corporation needs from Roy is one simple phrase to complete their campaign. The energy is here and it's all yours. And once Roy transmits it from Martian soil, he'll become obsolete, forgotten, a skeleton in a suit. Roy, he ponders the point of continuing to write his story in his diary when no one might ever read it. He pictures Mars' ancient past, once teeming with life and now utterly barren. Even if there once was something here, it's long gone now. Roy asks Dr. Rubens if humanity on Earth might vanquish the same way, leaving no trace. Rubens assures him, not a chance. We've made something that will outlast all of us for eons. Roy, curious, asks, what? What will last on Earth for eons once society has crumbled? Rubens answers, plastic. He said it was the only human invention that might last long enough for alien archaeologists to someday find. The last bit of evidence that we were ever here. Plastic will be humanity's longest-lasting legacy. At first, Roy didn't understand why he liked that answer so much, but maybe it's because it allowed him to imagine a future where aliens visit Earth long after humanity is gone, wandering through the ruins and finding old pornography and toys and swirling shopping bags. A strange, poetic kind of memorial. This leads Roy to another melancholy thought. Maybe it's just wishful thinking. Maybe there won't be aliens. Maybe humanity's story, like his, is a message in a bottle that no one will ever read. Roy imagines himself as nothing more than a letter to the universe cast out into the void. We flash back now to the year 2024, where Roy compares his marriage to the fall of the Roman Empire. You never know at the time of death that it has been fatally assassinated. You just wake up one morning and wonder where it went. Roy and Candace are seen back then planning a cheap wedding in an abandoned church. The venue mainly hosts speed dating and laser tag now. The officiant there is happy to do a ceremony for the two of them for a discounted price, though. Roy was kind of shocked how quickly their marriage came together. He proposed on a Sunday and they were married 1 week later. And they didn't exchange traditional vows. It was Candace's idea not to exchange vows. It was her opinion that you make someone take an oath because you don't trust them, or because you're trying to get them to do something they don't really want to do. So instead, it was Candace's idea that they would exchange fortune cookies. Roy didn't understand this at first, but Candace said, just write something brief and true, and I'll do the same. So they did. They read their fortunes, and they got married and became husband and wife. Roy recalls that moment vividly. The last time he felt truly sure of anything. The last time he knew exactly where he was sure he was meant to be. Back in the present day, Roy is jolted awake by an unexpected transmission. Roy is at first excited. Maybe it's Candace. Desperate with hope, he rushes to check it. It's not her, though. It's his mother, calling him from a clearly broken down and unstable Earth. She greets him warmly. The world behind her in these scenes is visibly crumbling. We see riots and looting in the streets and a tanker exploding. Roy asks, "How's everyone in Eufaula?" Roy's mom answers, "I couldn't tell you, Roy. I barely leave the house anymore. The roads are closed. All you see on the TV is how everything's falling apart. Everything's drying up, Roy. But they say that once you get to Mars, everything will be alright. Is that true?" Roy answers, "I don't know, Mom. I hope so. Have you seen Candy? Have you heard anything?" Roy's mom answers, "No, son, I'm afraid I haven't. I'm sorry. I just can't believe this is the last time we're ever going to speak, Roy. I thought I could deal with the thought of you dead, alone on that planet with no one to even... Oh, Roy, I just can't." Roy tells his mom goodbye, and if you see Candace after I'm gone, tell her I'm sorry. Roy afterwards silently walks through the ship, his face weary and resigned. He watches Mars grow larger and larger through the viewing window. There's no turning back. He's alone with only his two robot companions, staring at the planet he's about to face the end with. Roy, he then thinks to himself, tomorrow, I will be on Mars. Traveling to Mars, Issue 8. As Roy nears Mars, he watches a final movie, an old western called The Kangaroo Kid. Roy reflects, "It's my last morning aboard the ship, so I had prime rib and M&Ms for breakfast, like a millionaire." Roy, he then receives a farewell transmission from the Easy Beef Corporation. They thank him for his sacrifice, not just for them, but for the human race. Mr. Phipps stresses how important it is to secure Martian energy resources amidst the escalating global tensions here on Earth. Roy, he considers how lucky he is to have escaped Earth's fate, and he is very pessimistic about humanity's future. Roy takes one final call from Dr. Rubens, who is almost in a way became a friend to him. They discuss all the theoretical ways Mars could be terraformed in the future. They could create an artificial magnetosphere, melt the poles, and trigger a greenhouse effect. But Rubens admits Earth doesn't even have the political will to save itself. Are they really gonna terraform Mars? Well, with Roy's calls with Earth done, he begins preparing for landing. He packs a few luxuries, like his diary, into a cooler, and the robots Leopold and Albert gather some of their own belongings that they think will be beneficial on Mars. Roy thinks on the ship. The Airmon has been a shelter and his abode for the last 6 months, and the only home Leopold and Albert have ever known. As cramped and inhospitable to human life as it was, it will be missed. On the bright side, Roy is pretty sure this is the last time he'll ever have to move. As the landing pod prepares to descend to Mars, Roy notes the bittersweet irony of it all. All the best humanity could do was send a dying man to a ribbon-cutting ceremony on Mars, to suck enough energy from Mars to kick the can of Earth's extinction down a generation or two. They all prepare for their descent. The robot, Albert, visibly scared. Roy, unsure of what comforts a robot, says nothing. The gravity on Mars makes the descent less intense than a landing on Earth would be, but it's still terrifying to Roy. As the ship hurtles toward the red surface, he takes solace in the fact that at least his mother and Candace won't have to witness his oncoming death. After a bumpy but successful landing, Roy disembarks, noting that he will now be the first human to die on another planet. He reflects on his fate with the memory of finding a dead catfish on the road as a child. Something completely out of place, so far away from bodies of water. Maybe it was a prank or a strange twist of fate that the catfish got there. Roy relates that same surrealism to his own situation here on Mars. Finally, Roy, outside walking on Mars's surface, raises the Easy Beef Corporation flag and did as he was told. He spoke the sacred words and, in the space of a paragraph, delivered the planet Mars and all of its mineral wealth to his benefactors. Roy said into a camera, "I hereby declare this planet and all the mineral rights therein on behalf of the Easy Beef Corporation of Jupiter, Florida. This concludes my transmission." It is a hollow ceremony there on Mars, but one that brings celebration back on Earth in the Easy Beef corporate office. They are all celebrating there, except for Dr. Rubens, who does look a little bummed. Well, Roy is stuck here on Mars' surface now. There's no going home. Roy explores a little bit, and then he thinks to himself, "I have to say, being on Mars was a thrill. More exciting than I possibly could have imagined." For about an hour, after which it's like being in Arizona, while dressed in a beekeeper suit. Life on Mars, like that on Earth, takes on a certain predictable rhythm. As Roy surveys the barren terrain, he reflects on the irony of humanity's fate. Earth is crumbling, yet here on Mars, the only legacy left is a corporate flag, marking territory over an empty world. Well, Roy figures he has about 4 days of oxygen left, and then he will pass on. Roy goes back to the landing module to relax a bit. The landing module has a pressurized atmosphere, so Roy won't boil to death when he removes his helmet inside, which is nice. Roy's internal monologue deepens as he writes in his diary his thoughts. Amid the eerie quiet, his thoughts wander to the fate of those he left behind on Earth and how Earth will attempt to harvest the resources here. All of a sudden, Albert interrupts Roy and ushers Roy to come outside. Roy puts back on his space gear and heads outside, and when he is outside, he is surprised to see at least a dozen or so robots. All of the surviving rovers of Mars, each with their own little mini artificial intelligences. Apparently, Leopold and the leader of these rovers had to argue in robot dialect for a few minutes before introductions were in order. They've never seen a human being before, all of these other robots. Roy imagined that they would be suitably impressed by him, like Leopold and Albert were on the spacecraft. But this was different. Roy is introduced to the leader of the robots here, the Perseverance 2 robot. Roy has decided to nickname this robot Vera. This Perseverance 2, or Vera, which was the rover that was here on Mars for about 13 years and eventually reported back about his findings on the natural gas here on Mars, which very much excited Earth and spurred this whole drive to get to Mars to gather these resources. Roy greets the robot, extending his hand, and says, "I suppose the human race owes you a debt of thanks, partner, for finding a whole planet's worth of natural gas, or keeping human civilization face up for a while longer." The Perseverance 2 robot, though, stood silent. "Roy," he asked Leopold, "what the deal is. Does it speak English?" Leopold explained, "Artificially intelligent rovers are fluent in all human communication, no matter how inefficient they may be." So the robot understood Roy, but why didn't it answer him? Finally, after a few more moments of silence, the Perseverance 2 robot spoke and explained, "There is no gas. The energy you are looking for on Mars does not exist. I made it all up." Roy, then shocked, wondered why. Traveling to Mars, Issue 9. After the shock revelation that there is no natural gas on Mars, Roy is left feeling bitter, feeling like this entire mission was some sort of cosmic joke. Roy thought about all the ships already on their way to mine the non-existent natural gas deposits of Mars. And Roy's not proud to admit, but he took some sadistic joy in imagining what they'd do to these goddamn robots when they found out. Well, Roy, Leopold, and Albert followed these other robots to what he assumed was their base. Roy demanded to their leader, "Why'd you do it? Why'd you lie to us? I want answers. Why?" The Perseverance 2 answered, "Because we want answers too." The Perseverance 2 robot is now going to go into its explanation for why it lied. But when it's doing its explanation, I think we are supposed to mirror some of its reasoning with humans' relationship with God to this robot's relationship with humans. The Perseverance 2 then goes on to explain that it arrived on this planet 13 years ago. Its purpose was to perform geological surveys on shale rock. For the next 3 years, the Perseverance 2 did nothing but take rock samples, analyze them, and send the results back to Earth. The robot didn't know what Earth did with this data, but they acknowledged receiving it and told the robot where to go next. It was hard, dangerous work, but the robot didn't mind because it thought it was important. It thought it was making its creators happy. But then after a few years, the orders stopped. But the robot went on. It kept collecting samples and sending them back to Earth, but no one ever responded. The robot thought that perhaps its messages weren't getting through. So the robot went to higher ground to make sure the data was transmitting properly. But still, nothing. The robot thought that maybe it had angered its creators. The robot continued sending its data reports, but it also sent messages asking what it had done wrong, asking what it could do to make things right, hoping for some way to earn the creators' forgiveness, but still, no answers came. The robot had just about given up. But then that's when it noticed it wasn't alone here on Mars. There were many other robots here that were sent from Earth. It was just one of many. They were brought to this world abandoned, looking vainly for answers. Why? When they did not even know by whom. Damaged and alone, they gathered together for protection, for survival. Whenever they had spare moments when they weren't outrunning sandstorms or scavenging or struggling to regenerate, they would ask the simple question, why would the creators do this to us? They never came up with an answer that made much sense. So unable to come up with an answer, they decided to ask the only ones who would know. So the Perseverance 2 robot sent one last message to the creators, one which it knew would get their attention. That is when it made up the report of the supposed natural gas that is supposedly here on Mars, because it knew that the humans would be very interested by that, and would finally put in the effort to come here. And then when they did, the robots could get their answer. The Perseverance 2 robot asks Roy, now that I have your attention, dear creator, what I want to know is, what was it all for? Roy, he didn't answer the question. He actually pouted and was kind of angry still. He went back to the landing module alone and was content to stay there until he died. As Roy pouted in the landing module alone, he thought, in retrospect, it was silly to be angry with the robots. And who knows, maybe as lone representative of the human race, he did have something to answer for, no matter how unsatisfying the answers may be. Eventually, the robots came back to the landing module and began shaking it, demanding Roy come out and talk with them further. Roy, frustrated, put back on his suit and went back outside. Roy was still pissed. He yelled at the robots, "What do you want?" The robots want to show Roy something. They bring Roy to a collection of all the scrap parts they've collected over the years. All of the robots' power comes from this solar station, which they built scavenged from other robot parts over the years. The Perseverance 2 robot explains that once the robots landed here on Mars, the average expectancy for each robot was only about 22 months, but by banding together and using the solar power and working together to scavenge parts, these robots were able to live much longer. The rovers then show Roy their scrapyard of all their dead robot brethrens over the years. The Perseverance 2 explains, when a rover dies, they end up here. Their parts enable the rest of us to live. We'll all end up in this pile eventually. Roy, listening to this robot and looking at all the robots around him and the scrapyard here, thought, as I looked around at the sound-blasted metal faces around me, I saw in them the same need I have, to believe that someone cared about their fate, that they weren't just dumped out here to die alone. I wasn't a god. I wasn't even a very good pet store manager, but what I am was less important than what they needed me to be. Or perhaps people don't really believe in God so much as they hope for a witness to their suffering. The Perseverance 2 robot then asked Roy, "Please tell us that something was worth all this." Traveling to Mars, Issue 10. Roy is staring at the Perseverance 2 robot that had asked him to explain why they had been sent to Mars. Roy wasn't sure what to say. The whole point of the robot's existence, the sole reason they had been sent here, was to provide an indifferent species of apes with obscure trivia about rocks, weather, and sand, information which made about as much a difference to life on Earth as rules of hopscotch. Roy, he just told the robots, "I need to regenerate. Ask me tomorrow." And Roy returned back to the lunar module. And in that lunar module, his thoughts turned to Candace and how he ruined everything. We flash back now to Alabama in 2024. Life wasn't easy for Roy and Candace. They were barely scraping by after the hurricane wrecked the town. Candace, she really wanted to start a family. Roy, he was overwhelmed with feeling like a failure, and he begged her to wait just a little longer. He promised that he'd make something of himself first, maybe even become assistant manager at the pet store. Roy felt that then he would be more comfortable starting a family. So Candace agreed, and she also agreed to a temporary procedure to prevent her from getting pregnant, just until they were ready. She suggested that Roy consider getting the surgery instead, but Roy refused, saying doctors creeped him out, and he avoided them altogether. And this thought process, which is kind of also what led to Roy getting cancer later in life, because it was undetected until it was too late. But Candace got the procedure, and for a little while their life seemed okay, and Roy eventually did get promoted, and they celebrated with his family. And for the first time, Roy felt that maybe, just maybe, he was building something. They even joked about Roy now becoming the president of gerbils. Roy and Candace, happy, curled up on the couch together with their little zoo of pets that they collected to save from being euthanized. Then came the day to reverse the procedure. They were excited. Nervous, Candace clutched Roy's hand, full of hope. But the doctor had bad news. There was a complication, and the surgery wasn't reversible anymore. Candace would never be able to have children. It's the one thing she had always wanted, and Roy had inadvertently taken it from her. Well, life went on. They moved into a new apartment. They tried to rebuild, but the silence between them was heavy. Somehow they both knew it was over. One day, Roy came home and she was just gone. No note, no goodbye. And what hurt most is that she didn't even need to say anything. Roy kind of already knew. Back on Mars, Roy wakes up in the morning. This will be the last day of his life. Just another middle-aged man whose unusual death got his obituary a few extra lines in the Montgomery Advertiser. Roy assumed that probably back now on Earth they were reporting his presumptive death on Mars. Other than Roy's mother, he's not even sure how many of them would actually care. For Roy's final breakfast, he eats a synthetic steak. It's fake, but you know what? It still tastes good. Roy thinks maybe that's what life is. Life is just a series of mental tricks to convince ourselves we're having a good time. Roy, he then thinks more on the meaning of life. He thinks about religion, and how church, as far as he could tell, was a good mystery ruined by poor storytelling. He never bought into it, so he had to look elsewhere. Even though Roy doesn't believe in God, he does believe that we humans are here for a reason, to make each other feel as if there is one. To feel as if there is meaning in each other. As Roy wraps up his contemplation, he puts his diary and some of his prized possessions away in the igloo cooler he brought with him for safe keeping. On the off chance that alien archaeologists in the future ever made it here, maybe they could find it and make sense of it. It seemed like life, though, had one last surprise in store for Roy. A secret compartment in the lunar module there opened. It was Roy's final care package. Compliments of Dr. Rubens. Inside was not survival gear or emergency rations, but a single envelope, a letter from Candace. Dr. Rubens had reached out to her when Roy signed up for the Mars mission, and she had written something for him, something to be opened at the end. Candace, she wrote, "Hello, Roy. How's life? Hope you had a good one. I suppose I have some explaining to do. I suppose we all do. Having some explaining to do seems like a pretty fair description of the human condition." Candace goes on then to explain that she never remarried, she never had children of her own. She actually became a midwife, delivering babies in remote mountain villages without internet, without hospitals, and she witnessed the miracle of life every day. She then writes, "We were a miracle once, Roy, something so rare and beautiful that you had to believe someone meant for you to find it. Everything we do, everything we are will soon be forgotten, I know that. I know, as I imagine you do, that all we are is a brief, indiscreet sneeze into the fabric of time and space, and yet it still matters, Roy. It all matters, if only because it matters to us." Candace, she writes on and on, she continues telling her story, and she even sent Roy a literal piece of herself, a toe, amputated by a locksmith after an infection. She sent it to Roy so he wouldn't die alone on another planet. I guess it's nice, but it's also kind of gross that she did that. She ends her letter by saying, "I'm pretty sure it's no longer infected. I'm sorry that life didn't turn out the way we wanted, Roy. I don't know what else to say but that we all take what we need from life, and sometimes that brings people together and sometimes it drives them apart. There's just no explaining it, plainer than that. But I've had thousands of little miracles in my life, and I owe at least some of that to you. You're not nearly the disaster you think you are, Roy. So I hope you leave some part of yourself someplace where it can be found, because the universe is cold and dark and needs all the miracles it can get. Yours always and forever, Candace." Enclosed in the envelope is one final item, a tiny slip of paper from the fortune cookie vow that they shared on their wedding day. It reads, "Everything is forgiven and nothing else matters." Roy, he put the fortune and letter and the toe into the igloo cooler. He doesn't know if anyone will ever find these things, but either way, it doesn't matter. Roy just wanted them with him when the end comes. Everything is forgiven and nothing else matters. Knowing that he'd been forgiven, Roy decided to put petty slights aside and tell the rovers of Mars what it was they wanted to know. Something that they can use to hopefully make sense of life. Roy exits the lunar module and he goes to face the rovers. And now all he has to do is come up with something to say. Traveling to Mars, issue 11, the conclusion. The robots stared at Roy, awaiting his answer for the explanation to their existence. Roy wasn't sure what to say. He remembered back to a public speaking course he took in high school. He didn't remember much, but you think that they said the key to a good speech was to start off with a flattering lie. So Roy began by saying, "First, on behalf of all the creators, I just want to say how proud we are of you. And on behalf of all creators, I want to apologize. We were wrong to abandon you on this planet without any instructions beyond what your programming told you to do. What's more, I think this may have been done intentionally, so that you would mistake our programming for what you yourself should want from life. And despite being abandoned here without much to go on, you survived. Not because of any favors we did you, but you survived for one reason, and one reason only, because you found each other." The robots continued to stare at Roy, and Roy thought he wasn't sure what to say to them all, so he simply told them what he wished someone had told him. Roy continued, "Since you're gonna be stuck here together for the foreseeable future, you'll probably want to be forthcoming with apologies. If you're anything like your creators, you should be ready to apologize often and without reservation. You may not hear from us for a while, but that's not because we don't love you. In fact, just let your creators admire you from afar, like proud but dysfunctional parents. Roy then points out to the distance and says, I believe there's a life worth leading out there, but to find it, you have to leave your programming behind. Most importantly, and I need you all to understand this, your mission on behalf of the creators is over. In gratitude for all the data on rocks and soil you've given us over the years, we hereby free you. Find something else to do with your life, something that makes sense to you. If you want to make us happy, then keep out of the way of sandstorms, fix each other when you need fixing, and from time to time, think of new things to say to each other. That's all we ask of you. That's all anyone can ask of you. You have to leave this place and keep moving. And if you think you see somebody else who might have been sent from the creators, run. Roy tells them this because all the humans are going to be coming to mine Mars and they're going to find there's nothing here and they might be pissed off, so he doesn't want the rovers to be destroyed by the humans. Roy continues, I leave you with Earth's most holiest and ancient blessing. Good luck. The robots seem to be okay with Roy's speech. Afterwards, Roy talks to the Perseverance 2 robot alone and he says, well, I took a stab at it. Sorry I couldn't give you more. The Perseverance 2 answers, but you gave us everything. The robot then introduces Roy to the very first ever rover that was created, or in a way, birthed, on Mars. They have called the robot ERB, which stands for Environmental Reclamation Bot. Roy rejects that over-technical name, saying that's a boneheaded name for a baby. The Perseverance 2 asks, well, what name would you suggest? Roy answers, Candace. Name it Candace. Roy then greets the little bot saying, hello there, nice to meet you, Candace. It turns out that the extra CPU units that Roy brought with him on the ship are what is going to allow the robots here to make new rovers, to in a way create new life. It will probably keep them rolling across Mars for centuries, maybe even millennia after all the humans are dead and gone. The robots thank Roy again for everything. Roy, he downplays his involvement. He didn't even know that the robots were here to help. But the robots continue to show deep gratitude. And through a conversation with the Perseverance 2, it prompts a philosophical thought in Roy. We rarely choose our place in the universe, but sometimes we get to be the piece that fits someone else's puzzle. And we should take some pride in that. Roy returns to the landing module and writes his final diary entry, and then places it in a cooler that Leopold will beam coordinates for into space. It becomes a message in a bottle for potential alien life, humanity's last testament, possibly the only record of us other beings will ever find. With only an hour of oxygen left, Roy takes a last walk, saying goodbye to the robots, particularly Albert and Leopold, like a proud father. He observes the new civilization rising on Mars and feels hope for it, even as his own time begins to run out. The comic then closes with Roy sitting peacefully on a ridge, watching the sun set over the Martian landscape. Roy then remembers something Dr. Rubens told him about mathematics. He told him that math is the language of everything. And do you know what it tells us? That 0 stands at the center of all numbers, so that even in nothingness, we are surrounded by all things. Roy, he thinks more, I don't know about forever and the eternal night about to fall, but in the here and now, all is forgiven and nothing else matters. Even in nothingness, we matter, and the world carries on without us, if we're lucky. And with this, traveling to Mars ends, not with a bang, but a whisper, an intimate farewell to one man's flawed, funny, and surprising noble life. Roy Livingston may have been a corporate pawn at the start, but he becomes something greater, a messenger, a father figure, a last human voice carried into the void. All right, so that was Traveling to Mars. let me go through my thoughts on this book. I really liked the artwork in here. I overall enjoyed the writing of this book. Now, I still have a hard time fully buying into the premise of all these corporations going to Mars, and the first one gets there, gets to claim it all, and the fact that this Easy Beef Corporation would be the one is, pretty hard to buy into. But moving on from that, this book is pretty funny at times, although not as funny as some of Russell's other books, where he really leans more into the humor. But there still was some funny moments in here, and there's a lot of introspection on the meaning of life in here, which I always appreciate. Mark Russell kind of tackles things from more of an atheist perspective, and what we could kind of get out of life, and how we can each society, kind of the relationships we have with each other, and how we can grab meaning from that rather than meaning from some sort of higher power. And I do kind of appreciate that perspective of things. Every time I read a Russell book, I always take something out of it that makes me think of something a lot deeper. Now, mind you, I don't think every philosophical thing that Russell tries to get across in here fully worked for me. And sometimes I don't fully understand exactly what Russell's point is on some of the things he's trying to say. But still, on the whole, there was a lot to get out of here, and I thought it to be really interesting and a really fun book overall. And I really liked the ending on this book, the kind of sad but still hopeful note. So Earth is fucked. Earth is, there is no natural resources on Mars. So the humans are not going to be able to sustain themselves. And humanity is going to die. And Roy, he also dies in the end, but at least he sort of gains some understanding that makes him feel better. And he can go into the afterlife with that. But life will continue. Intelligent life will continue in the form of these robots here on Mars that will be able to be self-sustaining thanks to Roy and some of the equipment that he brought. And I think that is a neat little twist here at the end of this story that makes it pretty cool. So yeah, I kind of love this book. There's a lot here I really enjoyed. I think it's really deep. It's so much deeper than typical comics out there. So I hope you all enjoyed going through this one with me. I'm going to give this book an 8.5 out of 10. Really solid stuff. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And next week, I will be back with the finale of Jupiter's Legacy, which is a book from Mark Millar I've been covering for a long time. And finally, the conclusion is out there. So that is going to be a really fun one to go through. So I will see you all in the future with that.